this morning is what I'm going to try to do Tuesdays and Thursdays, spend about the first 35 minutes in a presentation, mostly talking. You're welcome to follow along on your screen, and it's basically a set of slides, and I'll see how that goes. This is my first time publicly using the new slideshow macro, so we'll see how that works. And then we'll take a break for 5 minutes or so. And then we'll start in on exercise 1.02, which I've crafted and I'll do as a demo, show you how it works, and then give you time to build it yourself. Ready? Okay. So this is and James, we're recording, right? Yeah, okay. So this is presentation. The class is called Designing and Writing Interactive Texts. So I thought I'd start by talking about designing and writing interactive texts, each of those words separately. And we're going to try and view this as a slideshow. And we'll see what you think about these slides. So the slides themselves are interactive. We'll talk about what interactivity means as we get there, but we're going to start with this idea of what is a text. Okay, so what's a text? You know, you'd think a text would be easy to define, but of course it's not. And so for me and for our purposes, I've come up with some characteristics of what a text is. And I first think of it as something that's a bunch of content, but it's bounded, meaning there's boundaries around it. You can define it. You can say, oh, this is in the text, this is not in the text. The reason you need boundaries is so that you can distinguish what's in and what's out. The designwritestudio.com page that presents itself when you ask for it in your browser is a text. Just like any web page that responds when you ask for it is a text. You might also think of when you go to like Facebook.com, the entire website is a text. Even though when you go to Facebook.com and you're looking at that page, you're looking at a representation, you're looking at a piece of the text, but not the whole thing. You can't see all of Facebook, but you can imagine all of Facebook as a single text. Some scholars, well, when we think about it, we think about the World Wide Web. The entire web can also be thought of as a text. It's a pretty big one. It changes all the time. There's always new content being added, but it's a text. So in order to think of the web as a text, you'd have to say, okay, as of right this minute, let's take a copy of the entire web and treat it as a text. It's totally impractical to do, impossible, but from a analysis perspective, you could consider the web as a text. So that's what I mean by it's bounded. And I also want a text to include both the content and the design features. So it's not just the words, but it's the fact that what is a text on my slide is bigger and bolder than the text below it. So that's also part of the text, is the design features. Texts are woven together, and we'll see where that word woven comes from. It comes from the notion of fabric. The original notion of the word text comes from this word called textum, T-E-X-T-U-M, and you'll see that in this below in the slide, meaning oh, I thought you were in the class and thought, I mean, I've seen students walk in with laptops before, but I've never seen someone walk in with a desktop. So, okay, you're welcome to join. So a text is woven together, and you think I think of a fabric. A piece of fabric is like a text. It's got different threads, and you kind of weave it together. And you'll see that that's going to really make sense when we talk about hypertext. And I use that word authors. Sometimes I'll call them authors. Sometimes I'll call them writers, the people who make texts. And then texts are absorbed. You can look up what absorbed means. It's to be engaged with, to bring into yourself. I could have said read, but you don't really read a game. But if you think of a game as a text, the people who are playing the game. Usually we call them reader or users, but I like to call them readers. So we have writers and readers. Not much different than producers and users. There's all sorts of different words, but I like the words writers and readers because that should conjure up a different kind of meaning in your mind about what a writer and a reader is. And so texts are read, they're absorbed. So clicking on expand should work. Am I in the wrong? There we go. Yeah. And so that will just allow you to sort of see more of the main points that I wanted to do. The notion of a text is a fabric. We weave together strands of meaning. Those are copy pastes directly from a Wikipedia page. And in fact, these notes below here are all from that Wikipedia page, Text of Literary Theory. So you can go visit that page. And I just did some copy paste directly from Wikipedia. A lot of the stuff that we're going to work on, especially at the beginning, I want you to have a Wikipedia level knowledge of. You don't need to go beyond that, so you can just read the Wikipedia article and that's fine. So a text is an object. That's another word. Programmers use object. People engage in object-oriented programming. Tiddlers are objects. Web pages are objects. Pages in a book are objects. Anything can be an object. We're going to use that notion of object a lot, but a single text is a big object that can be read. And a lot of this work comes from English literature, people who study literary theory. And they're talking about here, text as an object can be read. The object could be a piece of literature, a street sign can be a text, a set of buildings is a text. And so you get the idea that anything can be a text. It's written, created, made, and read, absorbed, observed, etc. And so it gets a little bit into literary theory. We talk about signs and symbols and what that means. And as we move forward, we'll talk about how writing is about the creation of original content. So the literature people talk about the text as the thing that's been created by the authors, and then I added the words curated and designed. So your music list is a text. You didn't create the music, but you curated it, you collected it, you made the list. So, but you didn't actually write so if you think about like your music list as a text, how did you create that? So that's why I use the word curated in there. This is a pretty cool little feature. Then you hide it and it's back. My colors are kind of awful. So we can talk about new colors and I'll show you where the colors come from. They're actually not associated with the slides, but they're rendered dynamically. When you ask for the slides, it goes and finds the color depending on where the slide is in the presentation. So all the first slides are that yucky green and all the second slides are that nasty looking purple, but we'll soften the colors over time. But I was just been playing and then I forgot to change the defaults. And the slideshow is one of those things you can just pretty much, right? It loads up all the content. And there's little buttons that get you to the next slide. So first and previous, and then on every slide there's an end slideshow button. And you can leave your wiki in some weird state, and if it ever looks like you don't understand what's happening, just refresh it. Because the slideshows, what they do is they change the underlying theme of the wiki, and the rest of the wiki in this theme looks really weird. Okay, designing and writing interactive texts. Interactivity, we're just going backwards through those words. So what is interactivity? We don't know. I did some work on this in I don't know, I remember I had a conference paper. It seemed like ancient history. I think Ronald Reagan was still president, so it was 1988 or 87 or something, and we talked about interactive television. And literally, at the conference, I was talking to the guy who defined the term interactivity for the first time. It's like, well, that's really because we didn't know what it meant to be interactive in media. So we don't really know, we still don't have a good definition of interactivity. His definition, he was a communications scholar, and he went with the notion that conversation is the most interactive that you can be. And in order for a conversation to be interactive, I say something, you respond. So I've spoken, you've listened. You might respond or react, but it's not interactive until I say something else in response to your response to my comment. It's the third, right? So if I just say something, I'm broadcasting. That's not an interactive exchange. When you shake your head, then we're being almost interactive if I respond to your shaking of the head. But if the rest of you, if we're like broadcasting on television or even in a large lecture hall, and I don't take any feedback from the people listening, that's not an interactive lecture. If you jump up and down and laugh and stuff, you can do that in your own dorm rooms and I won't see it. So it's still not interactive. You're responding, but you're not interacting. When you fall asleep and I change my cadence to wake you up, now we have an interactive exchange. So that's one definition of interactivity. If you want to, no, you can sleep, but it's not interactive until I wake you up, right? Pardon?
That comment works to make it interactive.
If I respond.
You did.
Yeah, so now it's interactive, exactly. But we're designing interactive texts. How can a text be interactive? Like, how can it be interactive? So we're obviously using a different notion of interactivity than we did when we first started talking about interactive media. I think of games as interactive. You interact with the content, but yet the producer of the game doesn't know what you're doing. So she's not changing her behavior based on your action, but I still want that. I want to claim that as interactive. So we need a different definition. So we use that definition, which we're not going to focus on. It's like, wow, those are some nice words: symbolic, referential, objective, functionality, subject. Welcome to literary theory. Okay. We'll go back, and if we need that definition, we'll come back to it. We are talking about the relationship between humans and artifacts. Texts are artifacts that you create, and humans interact with your texts. They actually don't change it, right? When you play a game, and we can get philosophical about it, whether you're actually changing the game. Even if you're reacting with a database, you're actually changing it. That's a bit of a philosophical discussion, but leaving aside the notion that your traces are being recorded. When you play a game, you're interacting with it, but you're not actually changing it. You're just changing the way that you're perceiving it. And those are the kinds of texts that's the kind of interaction that we're talking about, okay? We're talking about the artifacts' interactive behavior as experienced by the user. So the interactivity is your experience. The interactivity is in the experience. You code to allow users to potentially interact, right? When you create a button on a web page, that's a potential for interaction. That's not interaction. When the person clicks the button, now they're interacting. But if they don't click the button, then they've not engaged in that form of interactivity. And that's the kind of interactivity that we're talking about. I like the example here of the iPod. The interactivity of an iPod is not its shape. I like this, that is an iPod version. That's kind of cool. That we use this example from the olden days of iPods, right? So the interaction of an iPod is not its shape and color, its design, its ability to play music, or its storage capacity, but it's the behavior of the user interface as experienced by the user. So think about this and go back and look at this in a couple of weeks when you're saying, am I really writing an interactive text? And see if it makes sense then. So the idea, again, that we perceive an artifact's interactivity through its use is the key point that I'm trying to get at. Okay, so writing. Designing and writing interactive texts, and I have designing and writing, so I must think they're different. I think, and in this class, we're going to blend the two activities in the same titler, and your design is sort of embedded in the stuff that you decode, including the words that you write and the things in angle brackets and stuff. But I still want to keep them separate, okay? So writing, in my definitions for this class, encompass creating, curating, assembling, designing, crafting, lots of different things. It's not just this medium of human communication representing language and emotion with signs and symbols. I think that I wrote the color of this slide. I want to think of that as writing. I designed what happens when you click on hide, but I wrote the color. So I didn't design the color, I wrote it. That's part of my writing. Writing traditionally, when you take like composition classes, is very similar to speech. Writing is not the language, but it's a tool used to be languages to be read as opposed to be heard. Okay, initial language was all oral before we had writing, so language was heard. Once we got the technology to take these arbitrary things that we call letters and string them together in these arbitrary things that now are words that have meaning, language was then read. So that was an older form of writing, and we're changing it a little bit, but basically writing yields texts, and there's lots of reasons that people write things. You write things because you're asked to for classes. But there's lots of reasons for writings. And then finally, designing is a little tough. We don't spend a lot of time about designing, although we do, the dictionary definitions of design are kind of helpful. I'm not sure I like these slides. They're a little demanding of me. But we'll see. So what is a design? It's a intended purpose. It's a plan. It's the way things look, the way things feel. It's not the content, but it's the envelope around the content, maybe. It's the code, but not the words. Code, but not the content. The display, but not the content. One of the things that we do a lot of in TiddlyWiki is sometimes we separate and sometimes we integrate the display instructions from the content. So you can have the exact same content rendered or displayed in all sorts of different ways because of your design. You can call it with design A or call it with design B. You see that when you look at the same web page on your phone versus on your laptops all the time. The design shifts. Things change. It's responsive design to your screen size. So I kind of like look and function, a little different than look and feel. I like the idea that there's purpose, planning, and intention behind a design that gives agency to the designers. That's really important. So the designers are sitting behind the content in a way. And the idea of designing as a verb highlights the activity of a design. It's something that's done with intention. So it doesn't just happen. Even if you use the quote unquote default design, you are designing. You're accepting the default that's given to you. If you just do nothing, a page looks the way it does when you create it. You designed it. You didn't exercise much agency, but you accepted somebody else's design. I like to take a look sometime when you get a chance at the Wikipedia article on design, which talks about the different 6 stages of the design process and the action-centric versus rational models of design. So view that and begin to think. Many of you are in the communication and information design program or in the interactive media and game design program. So think about what that word means, and you want to be designers because that's why you're majoring in a program of design. So what kind of designer are you going to be, and what does it mean to design? So we'll come back to that, but I just wanted to get those words out there to sort of start. That's a little small, that hide button. And then when you click End Slideshow, if it works, it should return you to the tiddler that you're on when you click the View Slideshow. So that's intended to give you a very broad overview of these 4 words. Which do you think of the four are most important for what we're going to be doing? Text, interactivity, writing, or designing? Which of those words, like, yeah, that's what I think I did when I made my first wiki? Did you write? Did you design? Did you make a text? Or did you create interaction?
Right.
So what'd you write?
We wrote,
You wrote a word, my first wiki, and hello world. You wrote that, yeah. Okay. In the next exercise, you actually write, like sentences, maybe even, well, not a paragraph, maybe even paragraphs. Did you create interactivity or the opportunity for interactivity? Well, if we look at your first exercise, we'll look at somebody's. Who's Dylan? Dylan here? Yeah, just pick a name randomly. Who's Jared? Yeah, I guess so. Ryan, I know Ryan. Ryan's there. We'll look at Ryan. So I can click, by the way, on his tiddler that I created, even though it's not much fun yet. But if we click on Justin's tiddler, he put a comment in. There's a comment field in the submission field now. So the comment shows up on his tiddler. So I can click on his tiddler, or I can just click on the link, and it will take me directly to Ryan's My First Wiki 7. He was persistent. Nevertheless, he persisted. He got to 7. Took a while, right?
I was having some problems with my laptop.
Yeah.
After I left class.
Did he create interactivity here? Are there opportunities for interacting with his content? Yeah. I can click on a link and go to it. I can close it and go back to his link. Clicking on links is interacting. I mean, there's not much here. Did he do any design work? Somebody did some design work. Who made the buttons? Brown, Eric, was that you? Who made the buttons? Somebody made buttons. I can't remember who it was. I commented on it in the group. But I don't, he changed his default buttons around. I don't remember who it was. I don't think he posted. No, this is good. Anyway, somebody changes the design of the buttons. Some people played with. Anybody play with any design features? What'd you do?
I put it on Google Docs. So you gotta go to the viewers.
Pardon?
Click on directions. Like go to the actual Google Docs list of the responses.
Oh, I didn't ingest it yet.
I just put it up now.
Oh, just now?
Yeah.
Okay. Oh yeah, I forgot where my directions are. Yeah, there we are. Are you Michael?
All the way at the bottom.
Eric Brown. There it is. You played with buttons. You did some design, right? So how'd you do that, by the way?
Which part?
You changed the default buttons, the graphics on the buttons.
Oh, I went to settings, I think.
Yeah. Okay. You changed something.
Yeah.
So he did some design work. Okay. So that's kind of the opportunity, is to use this platform to write texts. And we're going to write lots of texts, and your texts will get increasingly complicated. They'll have more than one tiddler, and they'll be more than My First Wiki. To create texts that feature opportunities for your readers to interact with your content. To write, and I want to encourage you to do all sorts of writing. We're going to write a little narrative in exercise 1.02, and the series of exercises that are in the 4 range are all writing academic papers or scholarly treatises. I shouldn't call them papers. Things about hypertext that you'll write as an academic. And you'll get to do the design work to do more than buttons, but certainly those of you who are interested can do all sorts of coloring and fonting and all the things that web designers do. You can design the way that interactivity happens and the way that things are presented. So we'll do all of those things as we will run through the class. I got through that in like 25 minutes instead of, it's only 4 words, so I guess that's good. So that's kind of the wrap of my presentation. That's a signal to James that he should